Thank you to those that filled in our absence. Shma Smina Shchiv Meira. We're in Gittin. Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph on the top. Shma Smina Shchiv Meira Shenitak Mecholi Lecholi Madnaso Matana. If a Shchiv Meira never gets better, he's sick and he never gets better, so then when he gives a matana, so the matana is going to be a matana. So the Gemara asks, is that true? Can we actually learn that when he goes from choli to choli, so now the matana will be a matana? Because we know that if he got better, then the matana wouldn't necessarily be a matana. But if he goes from one sickness to another directly, so then maybe the matana, seemingly as you're learning, will in fact be a matana, because it's as if he never got better, even though he went from one sickness to a second sickness. In says the Gemara, yes, to Amar Be'elazar Mishmei Derav Shchiv Meira Shenitak Mecholi Lecholi Matnaso Matana. If he goes from one sickness to another, even though seemingly you made it contingent on this sickness by going straight into another sickness continues in terms of halacha, and therefore the matana that he gave would be considered to be a matana. Rabba Virava Lo Sfira Luhu Hadar Rafuna. So what did Rav Huna say? So for this case, Rav Huna said, the case that they're about to argue on, Rav Huna said that if a Shchiv Meira gives a get, and then he gets better, so the get is in fact invalid. Shchiv Meira gives a get, so it's seemingly under conditions that he's going to die. If he gets better, then the get is invalid. So Rabba and Rava agree with that if the Shchiv Meira gets better, then the get should be invalid. However, they say that because of a Gzeira, we're actually going to make the get of a Shchiv Meira work even if he gets better. Even though Mistat Sfara, they'd agree it shouldn't work. Because the Maisa got better. He seemingly only gave a condition on that he's not going to get better. Because he wanted to prevent his wife from having to go through the process of Yibum, let's say. So if he gets better, really it shouldn't work. But they come along and say that it works. Why does it work? Because what happens? If you say that if he gets better, then it doesn't work, it's invalid. But if he doesn't get better, so then it's valid. So what are you going to come to think? When exactly is that validity coming into play? If it's invalid if he gets better, but it's valid if he doesn't get better. So when do you think that validity is coming into play? As soon as he dies. The problem is, then people are going to see that case, and they're going to analyze the two cases, and mitzat svara, they're going to say, so the get takes place as soon as he dies. But that's not true, because then people are going to think, okay, I could give a get on condition that it should take place as soon as I die. And that's not true, because a get can't be chal when a person dies. So since there's a gzeira that we're worried that people are going to now give get, I'll deny that it should take effect as soon as they die, which would not be a good get. Therefore, we're not going to let the get take effect. Therefore, we're not going to let the get be invalid, even if he gets better. Because again, if we start drawing distinctions between getting better and dying, then people are going to think the reason it's being chal is because he dies. And once he dies, it's chal. Now we're going to see that if you made it retroactively, that it should start from the time that I die, or that it should start from now, imesi, mehayom imesi, then it's going to be good. But in a regular case, where he just, I guess, seemingly, according to this, doesn't make any distinctions and just says, here's a get, and it should take effect, and now he gets better, so seemingly the get will be invalid. Even though it should be invalid, the get is going to be valid. What?
Sorry. If he's a Kohen, he's a catch-22.
Right.
He's lost no matter what he does. If he dies, if he lives, he can't marry. He can't live with her. If he dies, she's not divorced.
Right. Right.
Or
no,
she didn't get the...
No. If he lives, it's okay. She didn't get divorced.
If he lives, it's chal anyway, you said. A Kohen can't marry a divorced
If he gets better, according to her, so then the get is valid. Yeah. So the Gemara says, so in essence what you're telling me is as follows. Mitzad hadin, if the Shchiv Meira gets better, so then the get should be invalid. But because of a Gezerah, you're making it valid. So in essence, what are you doing here? You're making her mutter to the entire world, even though Mitzad hadin, Mitzad deoraisa, she shouldn't be mutter to anybody. Can the rabbis really do that? Can they make it so that she's really usher to everyone because it's not really a get, but Mitzad Gezerah, they're going to make her mutter because they're going to say it's a get in? Yes, of course, rabbis could do anything. Kol de mekadesh adaita de rabbanan mekadesh v'afkinu rabbanan l'kidushin minei. Because anybody who is mekadesh or the mekadesh adaita de rabbanan, and the rabbanan can take away the kedushin minei. That means we know, and this is how we hold, Rabbanan can retroactively go ahead and say that any kedushin was invalid.
Right from the beginning.
Amalei Ravina Lavashi, yes. Tinach de Kaddish Bekasper, Kaddish Bebiya Ma'ikal Meimar. This is very nice. The rabbis can go ahead and retroactively annul marriages, but that only works when he was Mekadesh her with Kesef. That means if I give a woman Kesef, and now for whatever reason the rabbi said it's an invalid marriage, so what's going to happen? It's okay, so I gave her some Kesef, we never lived together, the rabbis are going to say it was an invalid marriage, so what were you doing when you gave her Kesef? Okay, you gave her a gift. Problem is, Tinach de Kaddish Bekasper, Kaddish Bebiya Ma'ikal Meimar. Let's say two people have Bia. They go and they do the Kedushin with Bia, or they get married and now they're living together. And now all of a sudden the rabbis are going to say, no, invalid retroactively. So we can't say that he was giving her all those Bias as gifts. So in that case, the rabbis look at each Bia as Bilasness. Now this comes up halacha l'maaseh. Right? This comes up with a Kohen, let's say, wants to marry a Grusha. So now mitzvah the Kohen side. Let's not talk about the Kohen for a second. Let's talk about the Grusha for a second. So there are cases where the rabbi or somebody will say that the Grusha was never really married. Those are cases. Again, sometimes there's a case where the Kohen is not really a Kohen, maybe, or the Grusha is not really married. The second case is more common, where the Grusha is not really married. So if the Grusha wasn't really married, fine. The problem is you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like I know of cases like this. So Lamais, in essence, what you're saying is this woman was married for 20 years, or for 5 years, or for 1 year. Now we're going to say, no, there was a mistake in the Ksuva, so Lamaisa, retroactively, she was never married. That's fine. But it's not like they just were Mekadesh with Kesef and then they got divorced. In essence, according to this Gemara, I'm not judging anyone, Chas v'shalom, but according to this Gemara, it ends up that if you're going to go ahead and you're going to get that heter that your marriage was never good, Afginu Rabbanan l'Kedushim Menei. So in essence, the Rabbanan are going to say then that all of your Bias were Be'ilas Nus.
And the children.
Children are mamzerim, because at the end of the day, no, because if you have a child, if you have two single people who get together, children are mamzerim. This is really, in essence, what it was you were living with a woman who wasn't your wife. We always talk about living with other women, so you were living with a woman for the last 10 years. And every single time you had Bia with her, she went to the mikveh, Nida, whatever, fine. You weren't over this of Nida, but you were basically, it was as you were living in a certain community and everybody was single and everybody was just having relations with each other. So it's just an interesting, it just comes out like that. And there are cases that we know of. But that's in essence, again, I'm not saying what happens, I'm not saying that God punishes, I'm just saying based on the Pashup shot in the Gemara, if you're going to annul a marriage retroactively, so then you need to say that, the Gemara would say that Shavir Rabbanan Libilas, so Bilas Nus, that all of the Bias happened during the time where Bias Nus. What exactly Nus means in terms of punishment, isn't that? Not getting there. But the Gemara would say, so now if that Gerusha can go ahead and marry a Kohen because she was never married before, so whatever she did with that first man, she wasn't married to him, so it was Bilas Nus.
You're not allowed to marry a Zoina either, Kohen.
We don't like that.
We don't pass
no, I believe a Kohen can marry a woman who if she wasn't a Basula, a Kohen could still marry her today. Kohen Gadol could marry her. But a Kohen could still marry a woman who's not a Basula.
Something about a Zoina.
No.
It's better than the alternative.
Tana Rabbanan.
If she gets married again, the kids will be mamzerim. So that's where Reb Moshe held like that.
Right.
They don't know if he gets married or not.
Right, but he can marry a widow, no? Nowadays.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. Marry a widow, just not a grusha. Same thing as having a single woman who was. But that's just an interesting aside point. Tana Rabbanan. The guy says, this is your get from today if I die from this choli. And lo and behold, the guy's not doing so well. Then the house falls on him, or a snake bites him, so it's not a get. The guy's not the luckiest guy in the world. He's sick, and before he knows it, okay, it's your get if I die from this choli, and now the house falls on him, it's not a get. Why not? Well, seemingly because he didn't die from this choli. He died from something else. The problem is, the Gemara then says, if I don't get up from this chola, so seemingly, what? Says the Gemara, it's a get. So what would you have said here? I don't want you to look at the Gemara for a second. What would you have said? Because the Gemara doesn't suggest this. What would you have said? What's the difference between the two cases? Why in the case where I said, so it's not a get?
He never recovered.
Excellent. So that's not what the Gemara says. I would have said that the Gemara says what? I would have said the reason the first case is not a get is because he says, this is your get if I die from this choli, so it's not a get because he didn't die from this choli. This is your get if I never get up from this choli, so the guy never got up from his choli for a different reason, but he never got up from his choli. The Gemara doesn't make that suggestion. the Gemara is going to learn differently. But interestingly, the Gemara doesn't make that thing, it doesn't make a diuk in the words like I would have made based on the words. That's what I would have made if I was writing the Gemara. The Gemara said the guy never got up from his choli, so it's a get. It's not what the Gemara says. So Maishna Reisha Maishna Seifa, Sholchu Mitam. So they went ahead and they sent the answer from there, because they had the same case. If you look at Rashi, that is a similar case, where the guy said, if I don't get up from this choli, and he was even, I don't know if he was better off or worse off, and then he got eaten by a lion. So they sent from Eretz Yisrael, and they said that it's not a get. It's not a get, which goes like the Reisha in our Mishnah. Why? Achlu Ari Ein Lanu. Right. Because when the guy says, it's sort of like a warranty when you buy a product. When the guy says that I'm giving you a get, assuming from today, assuming that I die from this choli, he's basically saying, if I die from anything that I can reasonably think of right now, then this get is going to be a get, retroactively, seemingly from today. So we say, did he have in mind that he was going to get eaten by a lion? Seemingly, he didn't have in mind that this get should be chal if I get eaten by a lion. Just like nobody here is giving a get to a wife on condition that they don't get eaten by a lion. Because it's not something that's even in your mind. The fact that the house is going to fall on you is not in your mind. So the Gemara is explaining that according to the ratio, which again, the way that the Svara seems to me makes more sense, it's not going to be a get if the guy says, Mehayomi, Mesim, Yosef, and he dies from this holy. That's what he had in mind. But he didn't have his mind a house falling on him, a snake eating him, an Ari eating him, and therefore if any of those things happen, ain't no get, as the ratio says. So what's the pshat in the Seifa? So we'll see in a second. The Gemara is going to say the Seifa is basically Meshubash. The Seifa, according to this, the Seifa doesn't neither make sense, or the Sefer is just not something that we hold like.
I could argue what was his reason that he gave him the get in the first place, because he wanted to have it in case he died.
Right.
Not necessarily from this illness.
Right.
So if a house fell on him and an lion ate him, he still died.
But again, he would never give a get. So the Gemara will argue he would never give a get that, oh, here's a get in case the house falls. We don't think like that. The point is that when he gave the get, the condition of the get was from this holy or from something similar that might happen. Says the Gemara, "Who gava dezav an ara lechavre." So we're talking about warranties now. A friend sold something to his friend, a piece of land. Kabbalah ka'onsa demisal. He gave him a warranty. If anything bad happens, I'll give you your money back. L'sof afiku banara. What happened? So the melech, as Rashi says, the melech commanded that an easement go through the property. The commandment said that, we got to go ahead and now we got to take an hour, we got to put it straight through the property that you just bought. Also, so he came before Ravina, so he said to Ravina, I want you to tell the guy either to give me back my money, to give me back some of my money, because Lamaisa, he guaranteed, he gave me a warranty, and now the king is going ahead and putting an easement through my property. No, it's an onsa d'lo shchiach. When he gave you the warranty, it was a warranty, assuming that under his conditions. Like when you buy an iPhone, so the warranty, if you drop it in the toilet, so it doesn't get included in the warranty, because it's not what they have in mind with the warranty. We try to give it to them and pretend it didn't drop in the toilet, but they're much smarter than us. That's why they're Apple, and they know when you drop it in the toilet and when you don't drop it in the toilet. So at the end of the day, the warranty that he was given here, it was a warranty for things that are foreseen, we would say. And that's, again, similar. I'm not saying Allah l'maisa, but that's similar. Like warranties are foreseen things. It's not something that you run over your thing with a car. It's that if there's a technical problem, if there's a problem with the hardware, whatever it is, that's what the warranty is. Something that they have in mind. So it's basically the guy did not have in mind to include that because again, he could have sold it to without any warranty, without any guarantee. So when he sold it to, he meant that if something's wrong with the land, if the crops don't grow, but the melech's going to come and after 100 years and he's never done it, put an easement through the property, that's not something that he had in mind when he gave you the warranty, and therefore he doesn't owe you anything. So they didn't know what to do. It went back and forth. Should he, does he have to return, does he not have to return? So then they brought a brisa. They brought a question from our brisa. It is a get, even though it's not something. Yeah, very nice. He brought me the seifa. The Reisha says it isn't a get. Yeah, you can't prove anything from here. Okay, so you bring the Sefer to support you, and he'll bring the Reisha to support him. Says the Gemara, Amar in Kevan de Kasher Esa Sefer lo Idmar Be Midrashim B'Shapshtahi Zil Basar Svar. So the Gemara says something very interesting. You're right. This brisa contradicts itself. The brisa says on one end, if the house falls, Harei a get. If the house falls, it's not a get. And we said it's not a diuk. The Gemara doesn't make any diuks based on the lashon. So the Gemara basically says we need to throw out that brisa. So now that we need to throw out that brisa, so Lamaisa, now we have a halachic shaila. The guy came, he bought a piece of land, and now the melech comes and puts an easement through the land. So Lamaisa, what do we tell the guy? Does he get his money back or does he not get his money back? I have a brisa, you don't have a brisa, because the brisa is self-contradictory. So what do? Now you need to go through svara. You want to go through svara, the Gemara says the svara of the reisha makes more sense. So if I ask you, why exactly are we telling the guy he doesn't get his money back? It's not because there's a reisha in the brisa. The brisa we threw out, because the brisa contradicts itself. But Lamaisa, the Gemara pulls out from the brisa and says, if I had to pick sides, the reisha makes more sense to me. And only things that are foreseen by the person giving the guarantee can he be held accountable for. And therefore, in this case, where he goes ahead and he sold you the land, and now the melech comes and puts an easement through the land, in that specific case, says the Gemara, Svara tells me that he didn't have that in mind. He only had in mind that if there was something wrong with the property, with the crops, or something of that nature, in that case, he'll give you back your money. But if the melech comes, he didn't have that in mind. If he didn't have that in mind, so Lamaisa, you're stuck and he doesn't owe you anything. So again, if I ask you, the answer is that he doesn't get his money back. Why? Not because the brisa says so, because Svara tells me so. That's what the Gemara would tell you. Says the Gemara, another story. Rav Papa Rafuna Bredi Rav Yeshua Zavin Shumshimi Agida Denar Malka. Right? They didn't go to Machane Yehuda. They bought sesame seeds on the bank of the Malka River. Agor Milche Leavorinhu. They didn't have a car, so they hired sailors, and they lived far away. Whatever, they were on business in by the Malka River, so they hired sailors to go bring there. They must have really liked sesame seeds. They brought sailors and hired sailors. You go bring the sesame seeds to our house. Bring them in your boat to our house. And the sesame seed and the this techina, right? And the sailors went ahead and kabilu alai kol on said the mishal. They said, we'll bring you the sesame seeds and we'll give you a warranty, like when you go and you move. So you get like it's worthless basically. People don't realize that, but it's like they give you like 8 cents per like pound or something. My farm are worth like, I don't know, much more than 8 cents a pound. But okay, it makes me feel good that I have insurance, even though I didn't have any insurance. But thank God. Kabilu alai kol on said the mishal. So the sailors said, we'll take over any onus that happens to your sesame seeds. So we'll take responsibility. So what happened? So the river was actually obstructed and they couldn't get to where they need to go. So now they wanted to give back the sesame seeds and say, okay, here's the sesame seeds. We can't do anything with it. We'll give you back your money, but now you're in charge. Or maybe we wouldn't even give you back your money, but seemingly they'll give you back the money. Fine. Says Rav Papa V'Rafuna Amar Lahu Aguru Chamre Afginu Nialanda Kabilu Alaichu Kolotza de Misale. Don't give me back the sesame seeds. Get me the sesame seeds where I need them. I don't care how you get the shipping and handling there. It's your responsibility. You can't bring it on your ship. So go ahead and hire camel drivers and just get it to me however you want to get it to me. But you already accept the responsibility. I paid you. I don't want my money back. And Lamaisa, that's it. You got to get me the sesame seeds. Also, Lakame de Rava. So they came before Rava. And Rava said to them, Amar Lahu, he said, you, Rav Papa and Rafuna are wrong. Kaki Chayure. You want to ever insult somebody, call them white geese. You're white geese, seemingly because they had white beards. It says, you guys are white geese. You're trying to throw off the shirts off of people. You're trying to take advantage of the sailors. Because the fact that they couldn't get through because the Nahar was obstructed, that was something that they could have foreseen when they gave you the warranty that they'll get it to you, and they're responsible for any onus. That's not an onus that they had in mind, and therefore, by definition, they're not responsible, and therefore, if they want to give you back the sesame seeds, they can give it back to you, and it's your problem to get them to where they need to go. And that is what the Gemara says. Zok the Mishnah. Lo tisyached imo. So the Mishnah says, very interestingly, that Lo tisyached imo. Now Rashi explains that we're going to have 2 different cases in the Mishnah, and this is based on the Gemara. The first case in the Mishnah is where the guy gives a get to his wife and says, Mehayomi mesi. The get takes effect today if I end up dying. So now the question becomes, well, he might die, he might not die. So if somebody gives a get to his wife and says, the get takes effect today if I end up dying. So what's the status of them between now and later? Well, retroactively, when might the get take effect? It might take effect today. The get takes effect today if I end up dying. So what do they need to do now? The guy's not dead now. Now he's alive. So can they still live together or can they not live together? Says the Gemara, they can live together because what? If retroactively it ended up that he dies, so then at the end of the day they were divorced as of today, and when they lived together from today for the next 3 months, so Lamaisa, they were living together be'isser. So Gemara says once he gives a get, so everybody said, good, I got a chap from this Gemara, I'm going to give my wife a get, that it should be chal, meos, whatever, right? Because they don't want anybody, right? If you want to prevent yibum, it's not so pashut. This is the other side of the story. It's not so pashut to give a get al tanai. Because if the get is al tanai mehayomi mesi, so Lamaisa, you can't live together in the meantime. Lo tisyachid imo ella bifnei edim. So they can't have yichud except in front of edim, seemingly like a regular two single people. Why? Afilu api eved, afilu api shifcha, whether it's an eved or shifcha, they could be the ones watching. Chutz mishivchasa milishaliba gaspa b'shivchasa. It can't be their maid. The housemaid can't be the one who's watching over them because Lamaisa, they're already comfortable with her and they're not going to be embarrassed to have relations in front of her. What's the problem with them having yichud? So as Rashi says, the first Rashi in the Mishnah, they might have relations. Well, interestingly, Rashi's going to bring two svaras. One svara that they can't be together is because they're like any two single people and you can't have yichud. Because again, if he ends up dying, then it'll be retroactively as of today. The second problem, Rashi says, which may even be a greater problem according to another Mandamer, is what? Let's say that they're together now. So again, mehayom imesi, a get from today if I end up dying. Now let's say that they stay together. So maybe what? We have to be choshesh if the guy dies in a month and they live together for that month. Maybe after he gave the get, Mehayomi Mesi, he had in mind that, okay, now I'm being with her, but not only am I being with her because I want to enjoy myself, I'm being with her l'shem kiddushin. So now when the guy dies, we don't know whether he died and now his wife is divorced, because it was Mehayomi Mesi, he ended up dying, so now retroactively he was divorced from the day he gave the get. Or maybe after that time, he had in mind to remarry her, and therefore even if the get took effect as of today, after he ends up dying, but 2 days later, he had in mind to have Kiddushin with her again when he had Bia with her. So the Gemara is going to say, regardless of whether the Chashash is that they're going to have Bia during that month, L'Shem Kiddushin, or that Lamaisa they just can't be together because they're also to each other, because just like any two single people are also to each other, have Yichud, they can't have relations with each other. So Lamaisa, either way, once you give a get in Mesi, Mehayom, that Mehayom Mesi, that should be effect from today, if I end up dying, so you can no longer have Yichud with each other.
She has to have it in mind as well, though. It's not enough for him to have it in mind, otherwise, right?
We're saying, if she accepts the get, Mehayomi
No,
Mesi.
I'm talking about the Bia.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so you can't ask her, you can't necessarily trust her. What I mean saying, we're going to ask her whether when they had Bia together, so she's going to deny whatever.
What was the? Was it a miro?
Yeah, was it l'shem yichud? Mahi be'osan hayamim. So what is she during those days? So the Gemara is going to explain that this is not talking about mehayomi mesi. Mehayomi mesi seemingly lo tisyached. They can't be together. That's what you just told me. Mahi be'osan hayamim. Rashi is going to explain. Now we're talking about a different case. Me'esh shani ba'olam. Again, what's the difference? One get is mehayomi mesi. It takes effect today if I die. The second get is me'esh shani ba'olam, means your get takes effect the last second that I'm in this world. So now you got a different suggestion here. Because if it's the last second that I'm in this world, so now one can argue what? That they can stay together because it's not going to take effect until the last second that he's in this world. Says the Gemara, Mahi be'osan hayamim, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ke'eshes ish l'chol devareha. That he's like an eshes ish for all dvareha, and even though seemingly it would take effect the last moment of his life, l'maisa, therefore what? Makes sense. Since it's only taking effect the last moment of his life, so they're considered to be married, and therefore, if somebody else, again, the nafkamina would be, let's say somebody else comes upon her now. So if you say that the case is mehayomi mesi, if a guy gives a get to his wife and says, from today if I die, and now another person has relations with her before the guy dies. So now, what happens? Well, mehayomi mesi, seemingly it's going to retroactively take effect as soon as he dies, and therefore the guy got lucky. Because Lamaisa, the guy ended up dying, and therefore when he was with this woman, retroactively, he was with a woman who was no longer married, and therefore he's not going to get the death penalty. If the guy lives and he recovers from this illness, so then the guy for sure she was an eshes ish. But the difference would be that if you say me'esh shani ba'olam, that it should take effect from the time that I die. So now Rabbi Yehuda says, so for sure if she has bia with anybody before the guy dies, l'maisa she's an eshes ish. And seemingly they can even live together according to the first opinion, because l'maisa there, Rabbi Yossi Omer migureshes ve'ena migureshes. Rabbi Yossi says it's not so pashut, and since any moment can be the last moment, and Rashi discusses this a little bit later. Well, he alludes to it. He alludes to the Brera, which we're not going to get into too much. But Rabbi Yossi argues and says that Migureshes ve'ena Migureshes, and we'll see what this means. But every moment could be the last moment of his life, and therefore, if another man is with this woman, so Lamaisa, the guy, even if he gets better, seemingly the guy would not be chayav skila, he would only be chayav for an ashram taloi. And again, Rashi, we'll see. Let's just see the Rashi, and then, because the Gemara is going going to get onto another discussion here, and then we'll come back to it later. Look at the top line. This is according to Rabbi Yehuda. That again, the guy said that the get here's a get, and it only takes effect the second before I die. So according to first opinion, she's an Eishes Ish. And if somebody has relations with her now between the time that he gave the get and the time that he dies, so she's an Eishes Ish, because it doesn't take effect until the second before he dies. Even though he dies from this choli, he made the condition that it only take effect the second before he dies, and therefore she was an Eishes Ish the whole time. Like I'm telling you now, he said to her when he gave her the get, it'll only take effect the last second before I die. She's an Eishes Ish. Seemingly they can live together, and at the end of the day, if somebody else is with her, then he's going to be chayav skila. He's going to be chayav chenek or chatas. For Rabbi Yossi savar michiyav la gita kol shaita misafkalam b'me'esh anibolim. You're right, says Rabbi Yossi. I agree that Lamaisa, the guy said that the get only takes effect the second before he dies. But every second, says Rabbi Yossi, he says, let's not take it for granted. You sound right. If you tell it to a room of people learning DAF Yomi, Rabbi Yehuda, you sound very convincing that Lamaisa she's not an Eish, she's an Eish until the second before he dies, because the Meister, the guy said. Rabbi Yossi says, let's talk about it for a second. Let's step back and talk about it in Svara. At the time that the other guy has relations with her, that could have been the last moment of the husband's life. And since we're not sure, and again, the way that the Rishonim explain it, since at every second between the time that he gives the get, which will take effect at the last second of his life, every second could have been the last second of his life. After the fact, it shows us that it wasn't. But at the time that the other man has relations with her, it could have been the last second of her husband's life, and the get could have been chal at that time. Since we're not sure whether we should consider it, we know what happened. We know he didn't die at that time. But since we're not sure whether to consider the second that he had bia with her as the possible last second of the husband's life, we're not sure, megaresh of inregesh, and therefore what do you do when you are not sure about doing a sin? You bring an asham taloi. That's what the Gemara says. Rabbi Yossi is much more complicated. Again, Rashi brings in this svara of Breira. Rabbi Yehuda is much more simple. He says, Lamaisa, I give a get that it should take place the second before the guy dies. Lamaisa, if she's with any man before the guy dies, she's an Eishes Ish. Rabbi Yossi says, not so simple. We're not going to kill a guy who comes ahead and is with her before the husband dies, because Lamaisa, we can break down every second. The second that he was actually with her, the Gemar Bia, let's say, the second that he was with her, we can look at that as being, maybe it could have been at the time the last second. Now again, I'm not getting into Svara. We're not saying that the guy took a chance and therefore he shouldn't be chayav because he thought maybe the guy was going to die at the time. But at the end of the day, halachically, we need to look at every second as the possible last second. Therefore, when he had Bia with the woman, it was the possible last second of the husband, even though he ended up not dying at that second. And therefore, we're not going to hold her like an Eish, and he's only going to get an Asham Talai. Let's step back for a second, because again, that's a complicated part at the end of it. But let's go back to the beginning of the Mishnah. The beginning of the Mishnah, that's going to be basically the rest of today. The beginning of the Mishnah was a case was what? He gives a get, Mehayomi Mesi. This get will retroactively take place today if I end up dying from the sickness. So we want to know, we said in the Mishnah what? We said in the Mishnah that they can't have yichud. Because Lamaisa, if he ends up dying from the sickness, then retroactively they were divorced as of today and they can't have yichud. The question is, what happens if they have yichud now? What happens if they have yichud? So what do you mean, what happens if they have yichud? So we said, if you remember, Rashi was not sure. Rashi said what? We're not sure whether they had l'shem kedushin. We're choshesh that they shouldn't have yichud because maybe if they have yichud, they're going to have bia, and if they have bia, so then Lamaisa, they're going to do a l'shem kedushin. So now the question becomes, he gave her again and said, Mehayomi Mesi, from today if I die. And now they have yichud, and now he dies. So the get took place from today, the day that he gave it to her. The problem is that they had yichud. The Gemara is asking, do we need to be choshesh that when they had yichud, they had bia? And do we need to be choshesh that if they had bia, then the bia that they had was l'shem kedushin? And therefore, do we need to be choshesh at the end of the day? Yes, maybe this particular get that he gave Me'ayomi Mesi when he dies takes effect today, February 23rd. But maybe when they had bia on February 25th, they had in mind to have the kedushin again because they knew that he would eventually die. And Lamaisa, when he dies, she's not a divorcee, but she's actually the husband, she's actually the wife of a person who just passed away, and therefore she would have to do yibum or chalitza. That's the halacha, that's the question. And the proof that they're going to bring to answer this question is from a regular case of a divorced couple. Let's see. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan. Let's see, you see a divorced couple. A couple gets divorced and then they have yichud. So we have the same question. If they have a divorced couple and now they have yichud, do we assume that they got married again? Do we assume that they had bia again in order to get married again? Or do we assume that they were just hanging out together and they didn't have bia? Or even if they had bia, it wasn't l'shem kedushin? That's the Gemara's question. Tana Rabbanan. That's the rest of today. If you see that a divorced couple went ahead and they had yichud together, you didn't see them having bia seemingly, but you saw them sleeping in the same bed. So you don't assume that they had bia. The Gemara seemingly contradicts itself right away. We're not choshesh that they had bia. Oh, by the way, we're choshesh that they had bia. But ve'ein choshesh mishum kedushin. We're not choshesh that they actually had the bia l'shem kedushin. What they had the bia for? They wanted to just hang out with each other. They didn't like each other when they were married, but at least when they were not married anymore, so now all of a sudden they like each other. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda, Omer, no. Av choshesh mishum kedushin. We're choshesh even for kedushin. Not only are we again, according to the first opinion, seemingly we're not choshesh for anything. We're not choshesh that they had bia. According to the next part in the Gemara, we're choshesh that they had bia when they had yichud, but we're not choshesh that they had bia l'shem kedushin. According to Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, we're choshesh that they had bia. Not only are we choshesh that they had bia, we're choshesh that they had bia l'shem kedushin. So what's the Mishnah telling? What's the Gemara telling us? How do we learn this? My kamar. Abba of Nachman Amar Rabba bar Rafua. Hachi kamar. Here's how you explain this brisa. Ra'ua shenivala. If you actually see them having bia, then choshesh mishum kedushin. So again, you see a divorced couple, not just that they go and they have yichud. You see a divorced couple having bia. So you need to be choshesh that the bia was not just a bia for fun, it was a bia to get married again. Nasan la ksafim. But if you see that after the bia, seemingly, he gives her money, so now it's not that he was having the bia to get married, he was giving the bia because he wanted to rent her services. Then choshesh mishum znus. So again, you see a divorced couple who are divorced and now they have bia. So if you just see them having bia, you assume that they mazel tov, they got married again. If you see them having bia, but then you see him paying her after the bia, it's not that they got married and now he's giving her her first allowance again. It's that lamaisa, they never got married again, he's just paying her to be with her. Says the Gemara, we assume that he gave it to her as payment. We don't assume that had kedushin. So again, you see them having bia, assume that it was kedushin. You see them having bia, and everyone agrees to that. You see them having bia, but then he pays her, you assume that it wasn't for kedushin. Rabbi Yosef, Yehuda Omer, af bezu choshen mishum kedushin. No. If you see them having bia, I agree, they're married again. If I see them having bia, but then he pays her, according to that, I assume that they're married also, and he was giving her her first allowance. That's the machlokes. Bia, we assume they're married. Bia and payment, Tanakama says, not married, just renting her services. Bia and payment, Rabbi Yosef, Yehuda says, no, married, and actually giving her first allowance. Keman Azla. Hadam Rabba Barachan Am Rabbi Yochanan. Machlokes k'shera'u shenivala. Avalora shenivala divrei kol in tzrichei menu get sheni. Now this is a separate mission, just to complicate things a little bit. There's a separate machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel by a divorced couple. This is in Hazorek in Shabbos. So Beis Hillel, we're going to go within Beis Hillel to keep things simple, and because that's how we pass in Lamaisa. So there's a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Rabba Bar Barchana Rabbi Yochanan tells us that the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is when they actually see each other having bia. When you see a divorced couple having bia, so what does Beis Shammai say? We're going to stick within Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says that if they are having relations, so then they're considered to be married. So Beis Hillel says when you see them having relations, they're considered to be married. Who's that like? Seemingly that's like both of the people in our Mishnah. In our brisa, we just said that if you see them having relations, everyone agrees that they're married, like Beis Hillel. If you don't see them having relations, divrei kol ein tzrichei menu get sheni. Then they don't need to get. Who's that like? That's like everybody. Keman divrei kol. So Beis Hillel works according to everybody there. Again, Beis Hillel says, if you see them having relations, you assume that it was l'shem kedushin. He doesn't say anything about kesef. If you don't see them having relations, if you just see them having yichud, then you don't assume that they did a l'shem kedushin. What do we have in our brisa? So the way that we just explained our brisa, everyone agrees if you see them having relations, it's a l'shem kedushin. They argue by kesef. Beis Hillel is not talking about kesef. And seemingly they all agree that if you don't see them having relations, then they're not married. So this all works out glot. And the way they were learning the brisa now goes within Beis Hillel. You see a divorced couple having relations, you assume that it was to redo the marriage. You see them having relations, and then he pays her, then there's a machlokes. You don't see them having relations, you just see them going to yichud, you go into a hotel room, you don't have to assume that they had bia, you don't have to assume that they had bia for sure l'shem kedushin, and therefore they're not married. And that works within Beis Hillel. Maskal Abayit, it's a very nice pshat. The problem is midei ksafim kitzani. You're learning our whole brisa on top as being that he gave her money afterwards. It says nothing. If you look at our brisa, it says nothing about giving her money. It just says nisasku b'davar acher ein choshishin, and then choshin mishum znus ein choshin mishum kedushin. It's very nice. It fits out with Beis Hillel. There's only one problem. You're putting in words that don't exist in our brisa. Therefore, the case can't be in our brisa that it's a case of giving her money, not giving her money. That doesn't say anything about money. So now, what's the machlokas Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi, and then how does that fit into Beis Hillel in the other Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Elam Aryai hachi kamar. No, wipe out everything we said. If you didn't understand it, good. So wipe it out anyway. Ra'ua shenivala chosheshim mishum znus. Again, you have a divorced couple. Now you see them actually having bia. Choshim mishum znus ve'en choshim mishum kedushin. Very simple. You see a divorced couple having bia, so you have to assume that it's just for znus and not for kedushin. Didn't work the first time, they're not going to do it again. Not for kedushin. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af choshim mishum kedushin. No. Very simple. You see a divorced couple having bia again. Tanakama says it was just for fun. Rabbi Yossi says no, they were getting married again. Very nice. So first of all, before we get to throwing this away, come on, who does this go? Like again, let's just say it outside. What did Beis Hillel say? Beis Hillel says that if they're having bia, you assume that it was for kedushin. Who's that like? That's like Rabbi Yossi. Because again, the way we're learning our brisa now, the Tanakhama says if you see them having bia, we don't assume it was for kedushin. So Keman Alzal Hadam Rabba Barachana Marviocha Machlovish Rosh Nivla Valor Rosh Nivla Divra Kol Intzrichem Enu Get Sheni. Who's that like? Keman Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Within that case, so Beis Hillel agrees with, or Rabbi Yossi is agreeing with Beis Hillel. And again, very simply put, you see a divorced couple getting together and having bia. According to Tanakama, we assume they're just having a good time. They're not getting married. According to Rabbi Yossi, they're getting married for a second time, and that's the way that Beis Hillel learns as well. There's only one problem. Look at the language of Rabbi Yossi in our brisa on top. He says, af choshim mishum kedushin. What do you mean, af choshim mishum kedushin? He should have said, the Tanakhama says, you're choshim mishum znus and not for kedushin. Rabbi Yossi says, it's choshin for kedushin. What do you mean, you're even choshish for kedushin? Doesn't work with our language. Throw out everything we just said. Maskala Rava, in kain mai af. Elam Rava, throw out everything we learned. If you didn't understand, good. Throw out everything we learned until now. Let's go back one more time. Elam Rava hachi kamar. Rabbi Yossi be Rabbi Yehuda Omer what? The Tanakhama says you see them having bia, so that's a good kedushin. So sorry, you see them having bia, so you're choshesh for kedushin. That's seemingly the way we're going to learn. We're going to go back to what we said before. You see them having bia, you're choshesh for kedushin. Nothing about kesef. You don't see them having bia. Seemingly everyone would agree you're not choshesh for kedushin. So what's the machloket Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakhama? No, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer aflo ra'uha shenivala choshim mishum kedushin. So now you have two extremes that come out from our brisa. If you see them having bia, everybody agrees that it's the shame kedushin. If you don't see them having bia, then Rabbi Yossi says you have to assume af. In that case, it's l'shem kedushin, and right, because not only are you assuming that they had bia, you're assuming now that they had bia and it was a shame kedushin. That's what Rabbi Yossi said. That's what the af is. But lamaisa, according to the Tanakhama, unless you see them actually having bia, you don't have to assume that it's l'shem kedushin. Fine. So again, so who's this like? Keman Alzahada Maraba Barachana Maryochna Machlok Sharush Nivala Valora Shnivala Divra Kol Ein Tzricha Menu Get Keman Delochad. Right? Ilatana Kama. I'm sorry. 1 second. Okay, so the Rashi is learning it a little bit differently. Let's say it again. When he says Rabbi Yossi Yehuda Omer Aflo Ra'ush Nivla Choshim Mishum Kedushin, he's learning that it's the other extreme. So let's go back to the top for a second because I want to understand it because this is where we're going to end up. Go to the Gemara for a second. Second line. Tana Rabbanan. Ra'ua shenisyachta imo ba'afela o sheyishana imo tachas margalas hamita ein choshim shema nisasku b'davar acher. We don't assume that they had bia. So the first thing is that the Tanakhama says that when you see them have yichud, you don't assume bia. Seemingly, this is the way I'm understanding. The Gemara doesn't say it, but I think this is what the Gemara is saying. Let's say you see them having bia, according to Tanakhama. Again, you don't see them having, you just see them having yichud. Don't assume any bia. Don't assume that they're totally prude and totally kosher. Now, let's say you actually see them having bia. So according to Tanakhama, the way I believe we're learning in the end is v'choshim mishum znus v'enchoshim mishum kedushin. So now, if you see them having bia, Tanakhama will say what? We don't assume that they're getting remarried, they're just having znus. So what's Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda saying, af choshim mishum kedushin? What's he saying, af? That what? Af, not only in the case where you see them having bia, do I disagree with you and say that it was l'shem kedushin and not l'shem znus, but I'm going to go so extreme to say that even if we just see them having yichud, we're going to assume that they had bia, and not only did they have bia, it was l'shem kedushin. So now we end up with two basically extremes. According to Rabbi Yossi, we don't assume that they had bia. According to Tanakama, we don't assume that they had bia when they had yichud. And even when you see them having the bia, we assume the best, and I don't know if it's the best. We assume the best, and we assume that they didn't do it l'shem kedushin. And therefore, l'maisa, if they're divorced, they're still divorced. Rabbi Yossi says the opposite extreme. If they had yichud, not only do we assume that they had bia, which you don't say, we assume that they had bia l'shem kedushin and they're married again. That's the two opposite extremes. And who does that come out like? It comes out like not like Beis Hillel, because again, it comes out like we said. El Azla Hadam Rabbi Barchana Machol Shirish Nivala Valorish Nivala Divrei Kol Inshich. Who does that come? I command Delochad. Nobody comes out like Beis Hillel. Why? Because what did Beis Hillel say? Beis Hillel says you see them having bia, you assume that it's l'shem kedushin. That's not what anybody says. According to the Tanakama, you see them having bia, you don't assume it's l'shem kedushin. According to Rabbi Yossi, you see them having bia, you don't assume it's l'shem kedushin, because l'maisa he would hold that even if you don't see them having bia, yes, he agrees. If you see them having bia, it's l'shem kedushin. But Beis Hillel will tell you, if I ask him, if I don't see them having bia, what is it? Beis Hillel will say, what do you mean? If I don't see them having bia, it's nothing. And Rabbi Yossi will argue and say, no, I don't agree with you, Beis Hillel. Even if I don't see them having bia, I just see them have yichud, I still assume they had bia, and I assume that the bia was l'shem kedushin. How does this come back to our Gemara? So the Gemara just leaves it like this. But I think that this would be the same exact thing. Mehayomi Mesi. If you say to a lady, here's your get from today if I die, so we said in the Gemara that they can't get together because retroactively, what? Retroactively, if he dies, then they're going to be divorced from today. So they can't have yichud together. So we said, what do we bring in this whole Gemara here of a case of a divorced couple? Because I think what we're bringing is to say, okay, now, L'maisa, what happens if this man and woman, the man who just gave his wife a get and said, this get will take place today, if I die, then what happens if they actually have yichud when they're not supposed to? So based on this Gemara of a divorced couple, it'll be a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi. Tanakama will say, if they have yichud, we don't assume that they had bia, therefore the get takes place as of today, and L'maisa, she's a divorced woman. According to Rabbi Yossi, no, we need to assume the worst. We need to assume that if he gave a get, mehayomi mesi, we need to assume that when they went and they had yichud, even just yichud after that fact, we need to assume that they consummated the marriage again. And now when the guy dies, very nice, you could say that this get takes place from February 22nd, but on February 24th, they reenacted the marriage. And Lamaisa, when he dies, now he dies as her being a married woman, and she would in fact, according to Yossi, have to go ahead and do the yibam or chalitza. That's how it comes out. Just give me 5 more minutes because, well, you don't have to, but 5 more minutes because we're going to pick up in the Mishnah tomorrow. Says the Gemara, Mahi be'osan hayamim. So now let's switch gears. We were just talking about the whole time mehayomi mesi. Now the Gemara is going to tell us mahi be'osan hayamim Yehuda merkeshes ish l'chol d'orer Yosem be'gresh ve'ena be'greshes. So we said, I already gave you the preview of what the Gemara is going to say, but now we said there's a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yossi, a separate machlokes. Again, the machlokes here was Tanakam and Rabbi Yossi, Ber Rabbi Yehuda. It's confusing. But over here now in our Mishnah, we had the second case. We said the first part of the Mishnah was mehayomi mesi. The get is from today if I end up dying. Now Rashi already told us what the Gemara is going to tell us here. The second part of the Mishnah was not from today if I end up dying, but it should take effect the second before I die. So now you have a machlokes. Tana uvilvach yom. It's assuming that the guy dies, it takes place a second before he dies. So the Gemara says, U'lechimayis havigita. The havamin over here is that the get's going to take place after he dies. Says the Gemara, no. Amarabba be'omer me'eshani ba'olam. No, the machlokes over here between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda is in a case where he says, here's a get. It doesn't take place today, retroactively, mehayomi mesi. It takes place a second before you die. And I already explained it outside, that if I give somebody a get and I say it takes place a second before I die, so the Maisa, according to Rabbi Yehuda, she's an Eishes Ish. Because the Maisa doesn't take place until the second before he dies. And if anybody's with her between now and the time that the husband dies, so she's an Eishes Ish l'chol davar. Rabbi Yossi will say no, based on Breira, that yes, Einachanami, it doesn't take place till the second before he dies. But since every second could have been the second before he died, so the Maisa, the guy didn't do, the guy was wrong for being with another person's wife, but we're not going to give him the death penalty because of the concept of Breira. But now let's to finish. So now the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanim, Yomim Shebein Tayim, the Yomim between. So again, this is seemingly both cases, I would assume. The guy gives a get to his wife. Either it'll take effect February 22nd, when I die it'll take effect February 22nd, or it'll take effect the second before I die. The Yamim Shebein Tayim. Now between the time that he gives the get and the time that he actually dies, we said that they can't have yichud, and if they have yichud or they have bia, we discussed that. But lamaisa, are they still married or are they not married? Forget about not having yichud. Now they're living in separate houses. But what about all the other parts of marriage? What does that mean? Well, let's give a good example. Yamim Shebein Tayim. Let's say she finds something during that time. Bala zakai b'mitziyasa. They can't have yichud because of a separate chashash that they might go ahead and consummate the marriage again. But lamaisa, for all intents and purposes, again, I think, maybe the Rishonim say differently, but I think this would be Bain either case. Bain if he says, here's the get, mehayomi mesi, today, it'll take place today, when I die, it'll take place February 22nd, it'll take effect, or it'll take effect on the day that I die, February 29th, it'll take effect right a second before I die. Whether he says either one of those, lamaisa, between the time that he gives the get on February 22nd and the time that he dies on March 1st, so what's the status? Are they married or not? Gemara says they're clearly married. Says the Gemara, Yomim Shebein Tayim, Bala Zakai b'mitziyasa. If she finds something, he gets it. Ubemas Yedeh. If she goes to work, he gets it. Uvafaras Nedereh. If she makes a neder, he can be made for it. V'yorsha, he still inherits her. That means if she would die during those 10 days or during those 3 months, he inherits all of her stuff, and then when he dies, so his children inherit all of the stuff. Umitamila. If she dies and he's a shchiv mirah and he can make it to the cemetery and he's a kohen, he can still go because the Maisa they're still married, even though they can't have yichud together. Klalo shadavar harehi ki'ishto l'chol davar ela she'ena tzricha himenu get sheni. They're married. He just doesn't need another get because the Maisa what? Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, seemingly because they're still married. Because samach l'misa have a get. So here they're learning here samach l'misa. Fine. So now Rabbi Meir Omer bi'ilasa tluya. So now we're talking about that seemingly across the board. That whether it was from today or it was from the second before I die, l'maisa they can't be together. But Lamaisa, they're still married for all of these purposes. Now, seemingly going back to the other case, which we said, where the guy gives the get, and he says, from the second before I die. So what did we say? From the second before I die. So Rabbi Yehuda said, she's like an Eshes Ish, and if somebody is with her, so then Lamaisa, they're Chai of Skila, or the Chai of Chanek. And Rabbi Yossi said, no, that we say Breira, and it could have been the second before he died, and we're not going to punish him. So now, Rabbi Yehuda says, like he says in the Mishnah, that Ein etzricha menu get sheni, harei ki ishto l'chol davar. Kol shel davar l'mais. If somebody is with her, she's an eshet sis because it doesn't take effect till the second before he dies. Rabbi Meir Omer bi'ilaso tluya. The be'ila is tluya to whether he dies or not. Rabbi Yossi Omer bi'ilasa safek. And the Gemara is going to ask, what's the difference between bi'ilasa safek and bi'ilasa tluya? But Rabbi Yossi seemingly says, like we said in our Mishnah, migureshes ve'ena migureshes. The bi'ilasa is a safek. It means even if he ends up dying, lamaisa, we don't know how to treat the second that they had the bia, and therefore lamaisa he's going to bring an asham talib. V'chamer rabbi migureshes ve'ena migureshes. Uvilvad sheyamas. So ma'ika ben Rabbi Meir le Rabbi Yossi. It wasn't between bi'ilasa tluya and bi'ilasa safek. Rabbi Yochanan, it's just asham talam ika ben hayu. Le Rabbi Meir lo ma'isei asham taloi. According to Rabbi Meir, he doesn't even have to bring an asham taloi. That means they both agree that since every second could be the second before the guy dies, he doesn't even bring an asham taloi. Rabbi Yossi ma'isei asham taloi. So again, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi seemingly are going like Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah, and says that lamaisa we can't say that the girl is a full-fledged eshes ish because every second could be the last second of the husband, and they just argue whether the guy who is the adulterer now needs to bring an asham taloi. Rabbi Yossi. What do you mean? That's Rabbi Yossi. Look at our look at our Mishnah. You're right. So basically what the Gemara is coming out and saying is Rabbi Yehuda is like Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. He's the one who says, since it takes effect the second before she dies, she's totally married, he gets all the stuff, anybody who's with her is an adulterer and gets killed. Everyone else, the way the Gemara seems to be learning, everyone else is somewhat in the party of Rabbi Yossi. To a certain extent, they're all basically saying we can't kill the guy because they're still married, but we can't kill him because of Breira, every second can be the last second. They're just arguing on logistics. Therefore, what? We can't kill the adulterer. Therefore, what do we do to him? Says Rabbi Yossi, we go ahead and we get and we make him bring an asham taloi. Says Rabbi Meir, we don't even bring him an asham taloi. What does the Chachamim say? Ika benai Rabbi Zera. Dam Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah, Mishmuel, Kol Makom Shem Chachamim Negreshes Negreshes, Baal Lechaya b'Mizon Osal. What do the Chachamim come and answer the picture? They say, yes, Lamaisa, we can't punish the adulterer, but they're still married. And just like the husband is going to get all of the he's going to get the mitzias, he's going to get the hafaras and Aryai, he gets the stuff, the Chamim just add to the equation that Lamaisa, they're still married in the sense that he still needs to go ahead and support her. Very interesting Gemara. Shkayach.